Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting solopreneurs share their startup stories. They also deliver tangible strategies that they would implement personally if starting their business over today. Each episode is a startup masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my special guest today is Stuart Leo. Stuart, thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
My absolute pleasure, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Stuart has already been gracious. I was late to get to the dance, and he held a spot on his dance card for me to get this interview in, and I really appreciate that, Stuart. But tell our audience a little bit about yourself. Like if you and I were meeting at a networking event, how would you introduce yourself?
I'm obviously Australian. G'day. You've probably heard that in the accent already. I herald from a place in Australia called the Gold Coast, which is kind of like the culture or the climate of Miami with the culture. Sorry, the culture of Miami with the climate of California. So we're
all the best.
All the best. So we beautiful place, 42 kilometers of beaches, backdrop with tropical rainforest, mountains. And just a beautiful place, city of about 750,000 people stretching across that coastline. And I've lived here for about 20 years, but I've worked in lots of different things. But the work I do today is leading a startup called Waymakerio. And we simply help people build better business. And we do that through our platform, Waymakerio, which diagnoses a business, develops growth opportunities and insights through our intelligent diagnostic, and allows you to translate that into strategic goals and plans for teams and leaders to manage and execute. And then we use some smart analytics to figure out if you're on track, not on track, and help you on track. And so we train other coaches and consultants to use the software with their clients, and we support businesses. Really with that one single problem of hit a ceiling and how do I break through the next ceiling? And so our vision is to help others build better business. And if we can help others build better businesses, then we're going to build better businesses all around the world. And I happen to believe that whether it be a business that's for profit or not for profit, any organization, that they're really important to our society. And if we can build good organizations, we can build good communities and create great jobs, do really interesting things. And that's a better hope and a better future for all.
See, I've got this theory. I think I've mentioned it before on the pod, but my theory is this whole idea of entrepreneurship kind of stems back from like the religious persecution that was happening in England about 400 years ago. And so the Puritans stayed in England and tried to purify the church, and the separatists decided, hey, we can't fix this, so we got to go somewhere else. And I think the separatists, they went to the Netherlands, they went, parts in Europe, but a lot of them went to the States and Canada and other places. And eventually, the next round, kind of ended up in Australia as well. So this whole idea of this, picking yourself up by your bootstraps and this kind of, I have to do it on my own. I think it feeds into this whole entrepreneurial mindset that is so rampant, not only in the States, but also I've seen, so rabid in Australia. And it's such a unique culture.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually. I think it was Winston Churchill that said, we first get to define our architecture, and then our architecture gets to define us. And what he was really saying was, we get to define our places, but then our places begin to define us.
For sure.
And you're exactly right. And I'm thinking back to my ancestors. I come from one side of the family, a Dutch line, and the other side of the family, an Irish Catholic line. And my Opa, my Dutch grandfather, he was taken in World War II, and what saved his life was he was a carpenter. So he ended up in a labor camp, not a concentration camp, but he ultimately escaped. And post World War II, he was part of that great migration out of Europe.
Yeah.
And imagine the mindset. You're looking around. He heralds from a place called Alkmaar, just near Amsterdam,
Mhm.
but obviously suffered greatly through World War II. And so he picked up his family, decided there's got to be a better hope and a future, and took what was then a £10 incentive for people to migrate from Europe down under to Australia. And my mother was just 2 or 3 at the time. She was just a little toddler. And they took that 9-month journey and came to effectively a refugee barracks camp south of Brisbane. He started building houses in this growing community, and I look back on those challenges, and I think, my goodness, I hop in my 8-speed automatic truck with air conditioning and plug in my iPhone to listen to a podcast or any music anywhere in the world, and I drive to work, and I think I've got it tough. No. Some of our forefathers looked around and went, the world is in chaos and I need to make a living. Why? Who for? And they're staring into the eyes of their children going, what life can I give you? And they pick themselves up. And that mindset and that character, I think, inspires me. They were never perfect people. They did lots of dumb things and rough things and stupid things. But when I look at some of the challenges I face, we were talking about podcast mics, before the show. I'm like, I've got to go and buy a podcast mic. I mean, flip, like my just 2 generations away, my mother's father was dealing with challenges that we can only imagine. And my mother grew up in a non-English speaking household that is in a brand new world and had to figure out how to live. It's we don't understand the simplicity of life we have. And I think business plays a role in protecting that, in nurturing that, strengthening that. So I'm kind of deeply passionate about that. We're not even talking about anything to do with what I thought we'd talk about.
I think I uncorked the bottle here. I bet on every podcast interview you've ever done that you've never had that kind of conversation up to this point.
I could
certainly strayed from the norm. That no doubt about it. But
exactly.
hey, that's kind of what I like to do. I mean, I have very little things scripted here, so it's kind of free flowing, and I really just like to kind of drill down into the story behind the entrepreneur and behind the startup founder. But I'm really curious to hear just the transition story, like what led to stepping into or creating or starting Waymaker.
Yeah, great question. Before Waymaker existed, I was a consultant running a consulting business for about 10 years. And before that, I was in the business of urban development, large scale master plan communities. So I had about 10 plus odd years in corporate life, and I decided that I wanted to jump ship and go and do something for myself. The entrepreneur mindset kicked in, which I'd always had since being a kid. My first job was my own job that I created out of university, and the first thing I ever did as a kid making money was something I created. It was always kind of in there in the DNA. I guess when you think back over life and the stories we were just talking about, you can see why. But one of the things that there's really 2 big things that I'll touch on for how Waymaker was born. When I left corporate life, I came across this story about how the British Army had reinvented itself in the battlefield in the late 80s and 90s, and institutionalized that in the 2000s. And corporate life, if you've worked corporate gigs, corporates are great at crushing the soul. They become bureaucratic. Not all. I had some of my best.
I have heard that before.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to poke fun at corporates, and I had some of my best and my worst times in corporate life. So this is not always 100% of the time, but corporates can fall into that bureaucracy mindset. And I remember going through months of committees and subcommittees to get one small thing changed, which would have, by the time it's changed, almost zero impact on life at the time. And decision making was difficult. And I came across this story about the British military, where as they were coming in the late 80s and 90s, when they were coming out of what we'd call the traditional Cold War, an enemy that was an enemy of state, a traditional enemy, enemy that had uniforms and traditional guns, and they sort of knew what would happen if you did something. But the Cold War was ending. The Berlin Wall came down in 1990, 91. The USSR was dissolving back into its different states, and geopolitical movements were happening. And as the Cold War was winding down, a hot war was winding up, and focus was shifting across to the Middle East. And there was a huge difference, though. This traditional enemy you could look at. They wore uniforms. They had generals. They were kind of mirrors of each other. But this new place, this new theatre of war, didn't. This new hot war was not an enemy of state, but an enemy of ideology.
Yeah,
It wasn't an army, but tribes and cells.
Non-traditional tactics, and
you've got it, yeah. And the traditional decision-making methods in the British military in the theatre of war on the ground were complex, complicated, time-consuming, and they didn't work in this new world. And so the British military had a problem. And they needed to create agility and decisiveness and focus on the battlefield. And so they stepped back, and to solve this problem, they developed a set of 7 questions. And they said to their military leaders, if you ask and answer these questions in the theatre of war, you will develop the highest value course of action to reach mission objective, and you'll align your team and you'll give yourself the best chance of success. And it was transformative to leadership in the theatre of war and operations. And it did a few things. It was transformative in its simplicity. Any emerging leader could learn a small number of questions. And so it wasn't like you had to go to kind of school for years on end to figure out how. You could ask and answer these questions in a team, and you could learn them. They were a language that could be embedded in your mind. So it was simple, it was easy to learn too. It transcended hierarchy. You could have a captain, a commander, a private, a corporal, a sergeant, all asking and answering the same questions at every level of the organization.
Kind of flattened out the organization, yeah.
It did, yeah. And then the third thing was that whilst the questions were simple, they had complexity behind them. They made the complex simple. So you could go shallow or you could go deep. So you could ask and answer the 7 questions, hunkered down behind some Humvees in the desert taking fire, or you could be back at HQ asking and answering the questions and developing a much more detailed strategic plan. But it was the same 7 questions. And so I was reading about this and how it was entirely transformative for the British military, and thought, wow, wouldn't it be awesome if you could do that in business? Because I'm a business guy. I'm not a military guy. My hat's off to anybody that's served. It's not been my past, but I love that the military is constantly innovating in the area of leadership and management. Why? Because lives are at stake. It's really important. And so when I looked at the questions, because I was like, oh, let's grab those questions and use them with some businesses. Let's see what happens. And really, when you look at the British military's questions, they're designed to blow something up. They're designed to kill an enemy. That's not necessarily the mentality you want to bring into an organization.
We need a different type of execution for our plan.
We don't need to blow things up. We need to build things up. So that started.
Hey, sometimes you got to blow them up before you build them up, right?
That's true. I'm not denying that. There are times when you might need to use the British military 7 questions, but then you'll need to turn to Waymaker's 7 questions. And so it started this journey of saying, well, are there a set of questions, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that you could write that could kind of achieve in business what the British military achieved in the theatre of war? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for a few years, that started this journey of literally me with a notepad trying to write a number of questions. And I'd write them out and I'd rewrite them. And actually, this sounds really sad, but I spent about 7 years writing 7 questions. And it was just, the first round was 5, then it turned into 6, and then I thought maybe it's 8. I was doing everything to avoid them being 7 questions because I didn't want them to be like the British military. And so ultimately, this set of questions kind of emerged that if you started to ask and answer, you would develop the highest value course of action in your business. And something magical was starting to happen with those questions, because they helped you create awareness, just like in the military, of what's going on around you. We don't have necessarily enemies, hopefully not. We have competitors, and we have substitutes, and we have threats. You start to develop clarity of focus of internally what you should be doing around purpose and vision and ideal customers and strategic positionings, and then you start to develop the highest value course of action through prioritization. And every business has 50 or 100 things they could be doing, but the art of strategy is really saying no to the 97 and yes to the 1, 2, or 3. And so the asking and answering the questions was a process of casting your mind out, bringing your mind back in, and then choosing to really prioritize. And so we started doing that with clients in our old consulting business, and very manual, just on a whiteboard, bit of paper. But at the same time, and I probably didn't realize this because it wasn't intentional at the time, but just like the British military, when they ask and answer their 7 questions, which, by the way, they've institutionalized, and if you're a commander in the British military, you'll learn the 7 questions. I often meet coaches and consultants that we're training, and they're ex-military, and they're having a little chuckle going, oh, I remember the 7 questions. And just like the military, when they're asking and answering those 7 questions, they've got some software in their hands. They're using some technology, and the technology is a tool. It's an enabler to help you ask questions faster, better, smarter than if you were just you with a piece of paper. So that's competitive advantage. So you can just simply ask and answer the 7 questions on a piece of paper. Highly encourage it. Pop into a cafe, get yourself a cup of coffee and a donut, sit back and ask yourself the 7 questions. You'll create value. But if you use some technology that can help you ask and answer smarter, faster, better, using some cool algorithms and bringing lots of data together, then perhaps you can ask more deeply, more effectively, and together as a team get better answers. And so we started building this diagnostic tool that really we wanted to do in 5 to 15 minutes what a management consultant might have to do over 6 weeks.
Right.
To look at an organization, understand it, talk to lots of different people, look at some of the data, and then go, well, actually, here are the key challenges and here are the key opportunities. And normally, if you're going to do that problem, you're going to ring somebody up that's got some domain expertise, that's got lots of experience, and you're going to write a check with a few zeros at the end of it. And 4 or 5 weeks later, they're going to come back after interviewing lots of people and looking at lots of things and watching lots of things, and they're going to say, look, I think you should be doing 1, 2, 3 things. And in their smarts, they'll have nailed it. And that's admirable. That's great. That's nothing wrong with that. We just went, could we figure out how to do that in 15 minutes using some technology and with 7 questions? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But you got to have a test market, right?
You got to have a test market. So for about 6 or 7 years, we were doing that, and COVID hit in 2020, end of 19, early 20. And our own consulting business, we were asking the questions of where are we going, what are we doing? And it just sometimes the winds blow the way the winds blow. The world lets you turn a negative into a positive. And we had this opportunity to say, well, I don't think COVID's going away for at least a year or 2. This isn't the flu. Life is not looking good for some time. Perhaps now is a good time to kind of hunker down, scale down, sit in the back office for a year or 2 and build something new. And so that's kind of what we did, quite literally. And it sounds easy to tell that story, but I can tell you that's a phenomenal tornado disruption. and,
A lot of whiteboarding.
That's
A lot
right.
of sessions in the whiteboard and a lot of iterations, and we're on version 47 of the the
Correct.
original idea. Yeah,
Correct. Yeah, it's over my morning cup of tea and a nice podcast with you, Kevin. It's easy to tell, but the reality is it was a poo storm for 3 or 4 years, and that's kind of what business is. And one of my favorite sayings is one of those old classic. I think it was a Zig Ziglar, one of the grandfathers of motivational leadership speaking, where he goes, "It's not the way the wind blows, but how you set the sails." And that I remember hearing that once in some motivational talk about 20 years ago, and it's just kind of stuck in here.
Stuck. Yep.
And so really, the 7 questions are a way of answering and responding to that statement. It's not the way the wind blows, but how you set the sails. And that's just kind of what, you imagine a small company of men in the desert trying to fight a war where they can't see a soldier, where they can't, it's this new world. You've got to play differently. You got to figure out how to win, but you're not playing the game you used to play. And the business world has gone through that same experience over the last 20 years.
For sure.
We've seen digital transform the way we work. Kevin, for you and I to do this 10, 15 years ago, I'd be in Vermont, Virginia. We'd be in a studio somewhere.
We'd have to be.
Exactly. The world's had digital disruption, it's had financial disruption, it's had geopolitical disruption, and we've had health and medical disruption, and that's just the big rocks. So the world in organizational leadership and management has changed. The 21st century is a new world and a new way of working, and we can't use the same tactics as the 20th century, but we must learn how to take the same effective principles and pick them up and drop them into the 21st century, so that we don't forget how to be great leaders and great managers, but some of the tactics are going to change. And so that's where we live.
That is absolutely true. And I like the way you kind of, it's, there are big rocks of change, but there are undercurrents of change that are happening all the time. That is kind of this whole world speeding up, type thing. But I'm curious to ask you that. So obviously you transition into, from kind of the corporate to the consultant to now I'm running my own shop here. So what are some lessons that you've learned that, they're not quantifiable in your Waymaker tool, that are just like, okay, I wish I'd have known these 1 or 2 things when I started on my own. It would have made so much difference, in how I led the team, or how it cost me $50,000 for this mistake that it's a hard lesson to learn. But what are 1 or 2 kind of universals that you would share with somebody that's just maybe further behind you in the journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can think of 2 and maybe a third, and we'll see where we land. I think the first one. First one's a real simple one, and it's a mindset one. I wasn't a natural, still not a natural sales guy. I'm a thinker and a creator, and once I'm in a room, I love it. But pitching and winning work was actually not a natural skill. And so when I left corporate, one of the things you have in corporate is bank balances. And bank balances bring the capacity to pick up phones and ring people and say, I need you to do this. And you can look like a good leader and a manager, but you're not really. The money's doing the work. You're just the person trying to place the money in the most effective way. When you step out of that world and you go, gosh, I'm just a guy with a laptop. I've got to go and eat what I kill. To use that language, I know there's great hunting grounds around.
We go for military tactics, hunting.
That's right. I'm really not that sort of guy. but you do have to go, my goodness, I've got to learn to hunt. And you've got to have some basic faith and belief and confidence to go, I can win. And a lot of corporate, I don't like using the word corporate, a lot of people that haven't grown up learning how to hunt, kill, and eat what you kill, if I can use that language, they're not comfortable doing that. And that's actually a skill to learn. And that was actually the biggest thing that hit me in the face, going, oh my goodness, I know how to spend $1 million with an ad agency, or, put a conference on, or, build a sales conference, but man, oh man, like, how do I go out now and sell myself or sell my product or pitch and win?
Yeah.
And to be honest, that was a confronting moment to learn, and a moment where you kind of, it was a mindset really, and all of these are kind of mindset things, to step back and go, okay, you got to figure out what value you bring. You got to have confidence in who you are and the problems you solve, and you know what, you've actually just got to get out there and start swinging. You can't sit and wait for the deer to come to you. You got to get out there and walk. And so I just had this mindset in the early days, and even in these days in startup life, you've got to have the same of some people call it hustle, but it's more than hustle. It's focused and deliberate, confident pitching of your product or your service or yourself to go and win. And that's actually a really hard thing to get in your mind and in your heart, because if you're a coach or a consultant or somebody that's selling a service that you do, not necessarily a product you might do, often rejection feels like personal rejection. Oh, Stu, no, we don't want to hire you. Oh man, those people, I really like that company. Why didn't they want me? What's wrong with me? And that they're just all the wrong thoughts to have. And the click that you got to move from that state of mind to the right state of mind is to get really clear on the problem you're solving, and to be able to articulate how you solve that problem better than anybody else, whether it be through you, your solution, or your product.
Yeah.
And once you kind of figure that out, which sounds simple sometimes when you say it, but when you're out there in the heat of battle trying to pitch and win, it completely reframes the conversation. It's not about you. It's not about them. It's about the problem they're facing and the value you bring by solving that problem, and how their life is better because you've solved it. And when you can communicate that and articulate that, suddenly you're like, where did all this business come from? Well, because you're actually helping people. You're solving their problems. They're not buying you because you're great. They're buying you or your product or your service because it solves the problem for them. And so you got to take you out of the equation, and you got to put the problem back into the equation. And then you got to figure out how to solve that problem better than anybody else. And when you do that, you take the ego away, you take the pride away, you take all those emotions out of the way, and you just get down to business. Does that make sense?
Man, if our listeners will just go back and hit rewind and listen to this like last 4 minutes or so of this little mini masterclass we just had right there, this could be life changing. It could literally change the course of what they're doing. And I mean, I can see that this is also born out of experience, kind of the school of hard knocks, I had to learn this intrinsically, or this is not something I read in a book. This is something I literally had to live out for about 10 years, and I've got the battle scars to prove that what I said is true. I've seen the hard part of the journey, and I've seen the kind of the cross the victory line too.
Yeah. Well, let me now give you almost let's fast forward a few years, and then I'll give you the next big lesson. Because these lessons aren't in textbooks. You will start to have some success, and you'll start to build a business, and you'll start to feel pretty damn good about yourself. And you're going to start to think that business is because of you.
Mm.
And you get, and something interesting is going to happen. Unless, well, the thing that's interesting that's going to happen is that your identity, who you are, is going to become intrinsically defined by how successful you're becoming. And you won't realize it. You'll just live it and love it. It'll be like, we just won that deal. How good am I? How good are us? How good are we? And things are going to get pretty good, like real good, nice good, like seat A1 in first class, good to LA kind of good. And that feels good, having the champagne served and all the wonderful things and trappings of success. And then something will happen that will blow your world apart, either because of you or because of something, one of those disruptions we talked about before. And you're going to wake up one day going, oh my goodness, what happened? This business isn't working the way I thought it would work. And I don't care who you are, you will one day face that. I was actually talking with a VC guy the other day. We were out to lunch, and I won't mention names, but he told the story of after 3 years of building an amazing fund as a fairly young man and just hitting massive numbers year on year on year. And a crisis happened, and at 5 minutes around midnight one night, he lost 95% of that fund.
Wow.
Now, I had a similar experience, not kind of as extravagant as that, but a moment where I'm like, oh man, like this business isn't working the way I thought it would be working. And because I had let my identity and the identity of the business get intrinsically entwined, which happens so often with founder-led businesses, as the business failed, I thought I was failing. And when you let that happen to you from a mindset perspective, you are just on a slippery slope of disaster. And it wasn't until somebody kind of like brutally confronted me, a great mentor and an advisor to me, and went, Stu, until you can separate your own identity from the business you run, then you will have no hope of actually doing the effective leadership and management required on this business. You need to separate, because you are not defined by the business. The business may have been defined by you, and you may have extended some of your character into it, but it doesn't go two ways. You have to step back and redefine your own sense of identity and confidence and character and purpose. And the business is a business. It's a thing. It's an entity.
Yeah. And so many factors out of your control.
100%. Yeah, and it always will be.
Yeah.
You know, you pick any famous, successful business person. They're not great people because of their business. They've just built a great business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right time, right place. So many factors had to fall into place that Steve Jobs was sharp, but so many things had to happen. That this couldn't have happened in 1973. You know, this had to happen in the 90s or whatever it was. So yeah.
And yes, what they've done has been amazing. What they've done with other people and what other people have done and the situation, but that doesn't define who they are.
Yeah. Steve
Jobs was still a father and a husband and a friend. And, you know, that was. Now we're getting closer to the who you are. You know, and we out there in world land go Steve Jobs equals Apple, Apple equals Steve Jobs, because we're doing that with just simplistic thinking. But when you let that thinking enter your mind as a leader and a founder and a manager, it's dangerous. It's horribly dangerous. And, you know, there's all this stuff that we use in business like social media and thought leadership and positioning and books and podcasts that are all designed to kind of beef you up a little bit and make you kind of sound good, but you've kind of got to step back from it and go, no. That's actually not who I am. Who I am is actually, in fact, somebody said the other day, the best character of who you are is what you do when you're alone. And that's actually going to come out and drive, you know, who you are and who you need to be when you're with others. And so when the bad times hit, when you need to reset those sails, you cannot have found your self-worth and identity in the entity of what you're working on. And if you have, then you've actually got no hope of resetting the sails, because you have to be the captain of the ship. You cannot be the ship.
Mhm.
And that makes sense.
Yeah. You've covered the full gamut, that kind of the start and how are you finishing well, or are you continuing well,
Yeah.
in this whole process. And it is a great story. I mean, it's because this is much broader and much bigger than Waymaker. I mean, we've talked about Waymaker, we talked about the tool, we talked about the benefits of it. We talked about so much more, the breadth and depth of just what it's like, a founder's life, and what are some really good life lessons to learn. And man, as we wrap up today, is there anything that we just haven't touched on that you just want to close us out with, and then tell people where the best place to find you online?
Yeah, I mean, best place to find me, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm probably in other places like, the other socials, but to be honest, I'm a terrible social guy. I'm only good in LinkedIn, and even then, I'm not if I'm that good. But connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll actually respond if you do it there. Follow Waymaker. You'll find Waymaker on LinkedIn and YouTube. And by the way, we offer a 30-day free trial if you want to use Waymaker. So if you're wondering, oh gosh, should I pull my team together? Let's take the business diagnostic. Haven't even really talked about what that is, but do it, have fun with it. If you get one good thing out of it, then hey, it hasn't cost you a thing, just some time, and you've got somewhere to go. So search me on LinkedIn, connect with me, jump onto our free trial at waymaker.io. They're the best places to go.
And is there a demo of the software?
Yeah, you can hit waymaker.io. There's a 2-minute demo, and then I think you can register to watch a 27-minute demo. So you can get a full overview and download. And if you're a coach or a consultant, then check out our partner program, where we provide the software, the toolkits, the playbooks, and the stuff you need to work with clients to create the shift using those 7 questions that I talked about, and helping organizations build clarity, alignment, and consistent results.
Well, Stuart, I really appreciate you taking the time tonight. And once again, thanks for your persistence in allowing us to start a little late today. And thankfully my Wi-Fi actually came back at just the right time. But Stuart, I really enjoyed just the journey through your story, and just kind of hearing the all of the peripheral around the idea of what it's like in the day in the life of a founder, that you kind of walked us through, and just really sharing your heart and just helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Stuart, have a great evening.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.